Blake Hutcheson, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Emma.
Can you share a time when you changed a long-held belief and what influenced that change?
I'll share with you a story. I went to London School of Economics many, many years ago. And every time I'd write a paper, and we had to write, I don't know, 25 papers in 50 weeks, I would write the purpose of this paper is X, my thesis is Y, and for the following 8 reasons, I fundamentally believe this is in support of the thesis. And I would stay awake till 2 in the morning writing my papers. And my best friend at LSE was always going to bed at 10 o'clock. Hey, Reed, how come I'm up half the night supporting my thesis and you go to bed early? And he said, Blake, let me tell you something. Let me tell you how I write my papers. The purpose of this paper is X. My thesis is Y. For the following 5 reasons, this thesis could be contested. Doesn't make any sense. But for the following 6 reasons, I think in support of this thesis, this is the prevailing argument. And so he'd give 5 reasons why it wouldn't be so, 6 reasons why it should be so. So in the end of the day, by a narrow margin, this is in support of the thesis. And to me, it taught me a lot. I got to bed earlier because it's a lot easier to find the 5 contrary reasons and the 6 good ones as opposed to 8 or 9 ones in full support. And it's allowed me to approach life where I don't have to go in with full conviction or trying to sell everybody. I'm the first to admit when I go into a boardroom, for the following 5 reasons, you may think this idea is crazy, but for the following other reasons, I think it makes sense on balance. It's not without risks. We'll mitigate the risks, but here's what we want to do. So that's one lesson, Emma, where I think we all be persuaded. I think it's important to weigh pros and cons. And once I do pros and cons, whether it's for a paper or a business decision, I have lots of narrow margin decisions. Sometimes I sway this way, sometimes I sway that way. But that sort of approach to problem solving has served me very well.
Are there any beliefs you feel you'll never abandon and why?
Values are unassailable. And so I run a global business. I run a company called OMERS. We have a balance sheet of about $250 billion. We've got 640,000 members. We've got offices around the world in 14 time zones. We invest in all kinds of asset classes. And I allow, as the CEO of the business, people to make decisions. The only way to scale a business is to give people local autonomy, and they make business decisions all day long. Many of our offices, whether they're in Berlin or Paris or Singapore or London or New York or Canada, we allow for local cultures. But the one thing we don't permit is people who don't share our values. And they're not for sale. They are to be jealously protected. We're an organization that is fiercely competitive, but has remained incredibly humble. And when I go around the world seeing our senior leaders, I am very amenable if they make a mistake, and because you don't always get it right in the investment business, no problem. But if they don't represent our values and they don't support our values, that's something that's not for sale. And I find that personally, and I find it corporately.
And what values specifically do you think these are that are fundamental to your company and to yourself?
Yeah, we have a core set of values, but, competitiveness, remaining humble, treating people fairly. Our handshake means something. Our soul is not for sale. Very fundamental, very fundamentally decent. We are Canadians. One of our competitive advantages is our handshake means something. Our word means something. We know what a friend is. Some others may forget. We don't. And so I don't want to do a transaction with somebody that I don't trust. Sadly, there are some out there who are breaking trust, but that's not us. And I have a thesis, Emma, which is called Business Travels at the Speed of Trust. And you can get amazing things done when there's trust in the room. There's actually a great editorial by George Shultz, who was an internal cabinet secretary for Ronald Reagan when he was president. He was 100 years old, and he wrote a piece to the Washington Post just prior to departing the planet. Amazing guy, by the way. And he said, you know what? I've learned one thing in life, and I want to share it with the world before I'm not here. And he said, trust is the currency of the kingdom. It's the gold of the realm. And when trust is in the room, anything's possible. Good things happen. When trust is not in the room, nothing's possible. Bad things happen. And you name the room, whether it's the locker room, whether it's the classroom, whether it's boardroom, whether it's the military room, any room in our lives, when there's trust in the room, great things happen. Anything's possible. When it's not in the room, that's just not true. Nothing's possible. So to me, the values go to the root of a handshake means something. Business travels at the speed of trust. Be fundamentally decent. You have to be fiercely competitive, but that doesn't mean you don't remain humble and you don't remain fair. And so those are some of the things that we founded this business on that are unassailable.
My next question for you is, what does it mean to disagree well?
My wife has a terrific expression. And my wife is a trained group psychotherapist. And so she's got lots of advantages over me whenever there's a discussion. But her comment has always been, some people listen to respond and other people listen to learn. And I think the best way to be able to disagree is not to sit on the edge of your seat, anxious to respond, whether that's a boardroom. When you're sitting around a boardroom and people, you want to get your ideas across, you hear something, but really you just want to say what you want to say. That's listening to respond. I think that the key to healthy disagreement is listening to learn, actually absorb the other person's position, reflect on their position, having heard it, give it credence because we're not always right. In fact, often, as I said earlier, there's 6 reasons for and 5 against. And so I think it's listening is the key ingredient, and listening with intent to learn and reflect as opposed to respond.
And finally, how can schools and universities promote good disagreement?
I'm chair of a high school, and it's a difficult time, right, in these schools you're in right now, where some people, there's certainly a collective in every school environment that is quite convinced the school's being overly woke and bending too far in certain practices and procedures and the language they choose in education. There's another portion of that society or the community of that school that says, we haven't gone far enough. We've got to do more on that front. And what I've learned is that if, as school administrators, leaders, teachers, if you placate this group, you just alienate this group. And if you placate this group, you alienate this group. So my advice is you've got to stay in this range. And you're never going to please these outsiders, and you're never going to please these outsiders, whether it's 10 or 15 or 20% or 10 or 15 to 20%. You've got to choose a course that's somewhere in the middle, and you've got to stay true to that course. And I think, that applies to disagreement. It applies to all sorts of things, like take a reasonable path for the vast majority of people and don't placate the extremes. And a learning institution is just that. It's about setting out an orchestra for people to choose which instrument they want, as opposed to demanding that everybody play the drums or the clarinet. And I find the best institutions introduce you to all the thoughts as opposed to try to indoctrinate you into one, and allow you to choose your own path with the privilege of seeing the whole orchestra at play. And I do think increasingly finding a middle and reasonable path in these learning institutions is by far the best way for young people, as opposed to trying to placate the extremes.